Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic. This week we're going to talk about something that I've just noticed more and more lately and heard people talk about, and I thought it was a good show topic. So we're going to talk about when we fly sloppy. And hopefully we don't all fly sloppy all the time, but when we do get a little complacent, we don't quite hold our heading or maybe hold our altitude, it's probably not the best thing for us. I read an article recently about why non-precision approaches shouldn't really be called non-precision, because we should always be flying as precisely as we can. And I thought this was a good show topic to talk about really some of the things you see on check rides, some of the things I hear around the flight school, and kind of tie it all back together on how we can all practice with purpose to fly more precisely. You ever see anybody get sloppy on a check ride, Wally?
Well, let me take it a little bit different angle. I got my private pilot certificate back in, a long time ago, 1982. And I did the check ride in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I flew home to Monroe, which is about 90 miles, so an hour flight or something. I landed in Monroe, and I remember going home. It was during the summertime, so it stayed late. I went home and had dinner with my parents, and then I immediately wanted to go take my father for an airplane ride. So we get back in the car, we drive back out to the airport, which is only a couple miles from home, and we hop in the airplane, and I take off, and I'm flying him around. Now, keep in mind, my father was a professional pilot as well. And I don't know, we were flying at, we were trying to fly at 2,000 feet, maybe. I don't remember the number, but call it 2,000 feet. And we're just flying around, and I was about 80 feet off my altitude. And he said to me, "What altitude are we trying to fly at?" And I said, 2,000 feet. And I said, "But you get 100 feet either side." And his comment to me was, "Not with me, you don't get down to 2,000 feet." And I just remember looking at him, and I'm sure there was a big eye roll involved, and I pushed the airplane down to 2,000 feet, and I held my 2,000 feet. And we landed, and his comment was, "If we're supposed to be at 2,000 feet, let's be at 2,000 feet. Let's not be at 2,080 feet. Let's be at 2,000 feet." And that has stuck with me. I can hear him to this day. Again, that was 40 years ago, and I still remember him saying that to me. So, don't look at tolerances, and don't say, well, for a private pilot, you get on steep turns you can be 100 feet off. Well, why? Why are we doing that? Let's try to make it as precise as we can.
Well, I'm assuming some applicants, as they're learning, they probably can't necessarily hold it. But if you're able to, by all means, pick it, call it out, and own it. And that's probably more specific to an altitude. Same thing probably for a heading. And I just think as I think about this topic of maybe sloppy is not the right word, maybe non-precise is a better phrase. But when we do fly and we aren't as precise as we can be, there's 1,000 little things that I can think about that I've done, that I've seen people do, that really highlight how easy we could start a chain reaction of small mistakes. It could turn into one big one. And I thought that would make a good topic. So let's talk, before we even get into the aircraft, just talk pre-flighting. Ever see someone, I won't say miss something on purpose, but overlook a little something during the pre-flight, whether it's a check ride or not? I think we've talked about one of yours a few times on this show, where we get a little complacent, maybe. Your hangar, your plane, your stuff, your fuel caps. I mean, it happens almost all the time. Do you see people do that? Do you ever watch things on the airport and see people make mistakes or get lazy when they're doing those parts of their flying?
Yeah, I do. And I think a lot of it, what happens is we get distracted in a pre-flight. Maybe we start and we're walking around the airplane and your friend walks by you because they just landed another airplane, and you stop and you talk to them a little bit, and it may be very valuable conversation that you're having with them, like, whoa, is it really bumpy up there? Or, how are the winds? How's that crosswind? I mean, that's valuable stuff. I mean, pilot reports are really good, and it's good to get reinforcement from someone to say, no, it's not too bad, or yeah, it's windy, but the winds are right down the runway. But so, typically with the airlines, when we get interrupted on a checklist, we go back a step. If we're on, let's say we're on a checklist that has 10 steps on it. If I'm on step 5 and all of a sudden maybe we're on the ground, flight attendants come up and need something, or the gate personnel come up and need something, instead of picking up on item number 5, we go back to item 4 and redo that one, so you start at a known spot. So that is something that can happen. Something else I'll see is not stumping the fuel after we're getting fueled. If you're, why are we stumping the fuel? The main reason is to look for water. Okay, so if we go out and we sump the fuel tanks and we determine that there's no water in the fuel tanks, and then the fueler comes up and fills the airplane with fuel, well, how do we know that fueler didn't just put a bunch of water in our airplane? So, that's something that I see, and it's, I don't know if people have ever really thought about it. I had one person one time tell me, well, it would take a long time for the water to separate from the fuel. Well, it doesn't take very long. If you've never done it, I would suggest that maybe when you sump your fuel tank, get a little bottle of water and pour some water in that container that you've drained the fuel from, and watch how quickly the water separates from the fuel. It's a matter of seconds. So I've seen that a few times. But I think the most common thing is to get interrupted on checklists, and then you're thinking, oh, where was I? And again, this is recapping an incident I talked about that I had with my daughter many probably about a year ago. There were two pilots doing a pre-flight on the airplane, and we kind of both assumed somebody did something. So that's a potential pitfall, is if you have two pilots.
Yeah, that's unfortunately happened around here, and wasn't too long ago somebody left a fuel cap off, and it's almost like to pass the word, right? Somebody thinks they did it and they didn't do it, and the other one thinks they did it and they didn't do it, and then you're left with an issue that could be really, really bad.
Right.
I just quickly did a Google search. Avgas is actually 28% lighter than water. So water's going to get to the bottom of that tank pretty doggone quick. And that's why the sumps are strategically put at the low points in tanks. And I would suspect, don't test this, but I would suspect it would get there in just a few seconds. So after they fuel it, go take your last bathroom break, come back and sump your tanks one more time. It might make your flight much more enjoyable one day.
Not too long ago, just within the last couple of weeks, I was proving a point to a student, and we had a standard small water bottle. What is it? Probably 10, 12 ounces, whatever it is. And there was probably 4 ounces of water in there. And I took the fuel out of the fuel cup that we had drained the sumps with, and I poured it in that water bottle and shook the water bottle, and then held the water bottle still, and it was a matter of about 4 seconds till that from the time the water separated from the fuel.
It is. It's a neat sight picture when you see it for the first time. Just how quick they separate. It looks just like oil and water almost, right? They're very, very different, and they don't want to be in each other's company, so they do separate quickly.
Right.
Other things I see on pre-flights, I just had someone recently taxi. It was a teaching moment, but a CFI let a student taxi all the way out to our run-up area with a pitot cover on, and multiple people at the airport were calling me saying, hey, one of your planes is about to take off with the pitot cover on. And thank goodness it was a teaching moment. The instructor was letting them learn from this mistake so that hopefully it would never happen again. But you got to be distracted in a big way or just miss some steps to miss a big red pitot cover hanging off the wing and not get that thing pulled off, right? And we've heard of control locks and other things really hurting people. It's just one of those points where we have to be precise in our pre-flight and make sure we don't let those things happen. I heard recently we wash our planes, use a hose, and many times our line guys will cover up the static ports with a little piece of tape, and we occasionally find the tape, right? It doesn't have to be a pilot that makes the mistake, right? The washer could be the one who left something on there, and if you don't do your due diligence and really do a good pre-flight, you could be in a world of hurt when those wheels leave the ground, for sure. And
please don't take this to mean that we need to do hour-long pre-flights. You know, I believe on a single-engine Cessna, a Warrior, or something like that. You know, a good and thorough pre-flight can be done in 7-8 minutes.
Says the DPE who's watched many pre-flights that go into the 40-minute mark, I bet.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. It's, boy, you know, we're in the cockpit, we're out. We're in the cockpit, we're out. We're going to the restroom, we're back in the cockpit, we're out. We're going to get a quart of oil, then we're back. Then we're going to the restroom again. Then we're going to get water. I have sat at the wingtip of many airplanes thinking, oh, boy.
Well, then they check the fuel and realize they got to call for fuel?
Yeah. Yep. And when we started, the fuel truck was right next door.
Oh, we've heard it all. So that's pre-flighting. Let's, I guess, walk through the phases of flights here. Let's talk about taxiing. Boy, my pet peeve is not being on the center line. I see it a lot. I don't understand it. I had an instructor who was very specific about it's there. It's right. Should feel like it's almost between your legs. Why can't you stay on it and follow it? Like, you know, cutting short across intersections and, exiting the runway and not staying on the center line. It's almost, I don't know what the word he used, but it was being a bad pilot, almost immature as a pilot. Use the center line, right? In your professional world, I don't know what the guidance is, but I'm assuming you're told to stay on the center line.
Yeah. And in fact, some of our airplanes, we have cameras that are looking down below us, and we can actually pull up the camera view so we can actually see where that nose wheel is. Because obviously in a big airplane, you don't see the nose wheel, and in fact on the 777, the nose wheel is behind you, behind where you sit. So it makes turning a little bit different. Knowing that where the airplane pivots is actually behind you. But that's an excellent point. I mean, that center line is defining the center of the taxiway. So why would you not want equal distance on each side of you? If you decide to be 5 feet right of the center line and you're on a 40-foot wide taxiway, well, now you got 45 feet on the left and you've got 35 feet on the right. That sounds like a lot of space, and it is for a small airplane. But, start these habits now. Start learning the right way to do it now, so when you progress to a bigger airplane, you don't have to change things. You don't have to all of a sudden say, oh, gee, I need to taxi on the center line. Same with the runway. I joke with applicants on check rides. I've said this many times. I'll say, as a taxpayer, you're paying for this runway, and as a taxpayer, you're paying for all of the runway. You can use the left side too. You don't have to. We don't have to land on the right side of the center line or the left side of the center line. Put it on the center line. You have the whole runway.
Yeah, I think that's one that I see as well. On takeoffs, the winds move them. On landings, the winds move them. And I can still hear my first couple CFIs saying, are you flying the plane or is the plane flying you, right? Like, who's in control here? And I think that's part of it, to be a precise pilot, to not be sloppy. You've got to do it all the time. And that's really the only way you're going to get better, is to truly practice being precise in every little aspect. So while we taxi, even if it's a light wind, be thinking about the wind corrections you should be making. You're not going to get even a 2,000-pound Cessna isn't going to get blown off the taxiway with a 5-knot wind. But if it's into you and from your left, put in the right corrections so that you would be able to do it the next time if it's a 25-knot wind, and might maybe move your wingtip up off the ground some, right? Same thing with landing. Make the correct corrections, land on the center line. Don't land 3 degrees of crab is crabbing the plane when you land, right? 30 degrees is really bad, but land straight. Land on the back 2 wheels first. Don't make it a flat landing. There's a million things that I think we do as pilots that aren't quite as precise, and it's probably more of those pilots out there that are like me. I'm not a professional pilot. While I own a flight school, I don't have the training department that put me through some rigor, and I've probably gotten lazy on some things over my flying hours, but I try, and I should really try to be precise in every aspect of my flying that I can be, because the big point for me, we got a lot to talk about still, is when bad things happen, I'm only going to fly to my worst day ever, probably, right? I'm going to fly to the way that I have been flying for the last 6 months.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to just change that and be Sully or Wally or anybody else that flies professionally because I want to. I can't make myself Chuck Yeager all of a sudden at the last minute.
I've been trying to throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball my entire life, and I haven't gotten there yet. The will is there. Man, I have the will to do it, but at this point, I've given up. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, and you haven't had Tommy John surgery, but you've had a lot of shoulder replacements. You might give that dream up sometime, Wally. At some point, it's not going to happen.
Right. You know what? One thing I mentioned something my father said to me, but one thing that he said to me very early on in my flying career was he asked me the question, and I've asked this to many applicants. I'll say, or he said, what are you doing when you're putting the seatbelt on? And I didn't understand where he was getting at, but the answer is you're strapping the airplane to your back. Okay? You're in control of that airplane. Make the airplane do what you want it to do. And crosswind landings is something that I see all the time, landing the airplane in a crab, and, you're just thinking, well, just a little bit more rudder input and you would have fixed that.
Yep. And the plane would have appreciated it. The plane owner would have appreciated it.
Yeah.
It's all for the greater good.
Right.
Let's talk about non-precision approaches. When you're doing an instrument check ride, do you not have expectations of there being some precision involved in that non-precision approach?
Absolutely, and that's an excellent point that you brought up. That maybe it's time to rename non-precision approaches to a non-glide slope approach, or something like that, because that's what defines a precision approach is glide slope information. So if we do a VOR or an RNAV that is not LPV, where we do not have a glide path, by definition, those are non-precision approaches. But in our GPS world now, those those approaches get us really precise. I mean, they get us really, really close. And so when you hear the word non-precision approach, it's a little bit of an oxymoron. They're pretty doggone precise.
I actually think they're harder from a sense that now I have to do some of that calculating myself. I think early in my instrument training, there was a philosophy of on a VOR or on a localizer without some glide slope that maybe I would dive a little bit more at my final approach fix down to a lower altitude. And I think a lot of what I've heard over the last couple of years taught some of that out, right? That we should still think 3 degrees and we should be able to calculate that based on our ground speed and time and not just dive down to a lower number, which makes that a much more difficult math problem in your brain that you're thinking through to be able to really get to where you want to get right at the right time. But I still don't want to be two dots off deflection. I don't want to be a mile left of my center line. There's a lot of things going on that I need to maintain and hold, and it should be expected of me whether I'm on a check ride or just got my family in the plane in low visibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we used to call it dive and drive on a non-precision approach, where you'd hit a fix, whether it be a VOR or a DME or whatever. You'd hit a fix, and you would immediately aggressively descend down to the minimum descent altitude, and it just gave you, more time to look for the runway, because back in the day we did ADF approaches, and boy, you throw wind in there, and they were truly non-precision. I mean, when you broke out of the clouds, your head was on a swivel, because that airport may be anywhere from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock.
Well, and that's what I definitely remember was dive as low as you can, as fast as you can. And there was also this principle of maybe you get out of the clouds early, right? So
right.
Who doesn't want to see if you have that option to see? And maybe you have visual a lot longer. But it also is a little bit more disorientating if you make those bigger movements in that aircraft when you're in the soup still, which just goes back to being a little bit more precise, being a little bit more intentional, and being more in control of that aircraft that's strapped to your back.
Yeah.
How about radio conversations in any of these phases of flight, from taxiing to actually being in the air? How precise or correct or accurate do you think we all are in our radio communications?
Yeah, this is probably a pet peeve of mine. Well, it is. It is a pet peeve of mine. I can go look at most of my notes that I've taken from check rides, and on most of them, we, as part of the debrief, we talk about radio phraseology, standard terms, and how we should be talking on the radio. The bottom line is we want effective communication between us and either ATC, or maybe we're on a common traffic advisory frequency. But I do hear a lot of just really bad habits. And we're all guilty of it to an extent. I'm sure if you went and listened to me talking to ATC, it could be nitpicked, and there could be something that I should be doing something better. But there are a lot of things that it doesn't take a whole lot more effort to say 10,000 than it takes to say 10,000. Okay, climb and maintain 10,000. Okay, climb and maintain 10,000. Okay, and that's the correct way to say it, 10,000 as versus 10,000. Yeah, there's a couple more syllables, I guess, but that is actually what the book says to do and the correct way to say it. The reason is it's at some point in your career, you may be flying in a foreign country where the controller's native language is not English. So we want to stay within the realm of standard phraseology. I remember flying with a student one time, and would, she was working on her CFI, and she would tell me to ascend to 6,000. And I would say the proper phraseology is not ascend, it's climb. And that's all I said to her at first. And then it occurred to me, the reason we don't say ascend is ascend sounds a lot like descend. Ascend, descend. They rhyme, right? So notice we descend and we climb. Those two words, those are the two words that we will get from ATC to tell us to change altitudes. They will either say climb or descend. Okay, so, and they don't sound anything alike. And, I mean, if you're talking to somebody and you start using the word ascend, maybe they start using that on the radio. Okay, ascend to, and it's just poor phraseology. And it's
it's a slippery slope of if you start saying it and you say it over and over again, what's going to happen when you are in that emergency? You're going to default back to that habit that you have.
Right.
That's not a good habit. So break those break those bad habits and create good habits.
Yeah.
So that if there's a problem, you do the good thing.
And most of this is in the AIM, which is non-regulatory in nature. So it's kind of like it's stuff you should do. Is it stuff you have to do? Well, no. Again, we want effective communication at the end of the day. But I'm telling you, I've been out in foreign countries in the middle of the night when you're talking to a controller who is probably fatigued. I'm probably fatigued, and there's a accent on his end, or well, he thinks there's an accent on my end. We don't speak the same native language, and we're trying to communicate, and there are big mountains out there, and there's weather out there, and there's other airplanes out there. Times like that, it's nice to be on the same sheet of music from a phraseology, from a terminology standpoint and phraseology.
Yeah, and we've talked about it, but you spend some time with a ATC guy or girl, and they know the book by like the back of their hand, and they will pick you apart in what you're saying, and I think they put up with it in areas where it's common, but I would bet in an emergency they're going to ask you to repeat and correct yourself and get it right so that they don't have any mistakes on their end and they don't tell you something that's not the right thing to do for sure.
Yeah.
And that's everywhere, and it is the hey, I'm ready to go, or the shortcuts that people say on the radio in their local hometown airports or in a non-towered, just chit-chatting on the radio. You just never know when someone's really needing those few seconds of airtime that you're taking it from them. So, again, be precise. Don't be sloppy.
Yeah.
And make it a better environment from radio to air to ground for everybody involved so that we can be as safe as we can possibly be. Any other sloppy pet peeves, Wally, that you have?
Well, let me just go back to the radio thing. Is I would just encourage our listeners to read the AIM. If you would spend, I'm telling you, if you would spend 5 minutes a week reading the phraseology portion of the AIM, I think it's chapter 4, I believe, and I'll bet you'd learn something. I mean, 5 minutes a week. Think about that. There is some really, really good information in the AIM, and really, really good stuff. And you'll probably find, gee, I've been saying that wrong all the time. One thing I hear all the time is students asking air traffic control to repeat. Could you repeat for 409 Alpha? Well, the phrase that we really want to use is say again. Say again for 409 Alpha. Again, is it effective communication? It might be. But maybe to the guy in the middle of the night who doesn't really speak English in the weather and mountains and other airplanes, it'd be nice to get it right the first time.
Yeah, it is section 4.2. radio communications and phraseology and techniques. Really good read there for sure. AOPA has all kinds of resources out there. Sample radio calls, things to think about. airsafetyinstitute.org/radiocom, COMM. A good resource for you to go out and learn the right way to say it and hopefully prevent somebody from getting confused, whether it's local or not. And then I think it is think like a commercial pilot, think like the pro you want to be, and practice with purpose every time you fly, every time you taxi, every time you pre-flight that aircraft, and you will be a better pilot. And those around you will recognize that for sure, and they'll emulate that and want to be better just like you. So as always, fly safely and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.